Welcome to our morning show today on WRCO on a snowy Monday. Joining us remotely today, representing the 17th Senate District, is Howard Marklein. Good morning, Howard.
Good morning, Phil.
How much snow did you get in your area?
You know what? It's hard to tell because it depends on where. With the wind, it's hard. Anywhere from almost nothing to probably a foot. So it all depends where you put the ruler in the ground. So I don't know. We had quite a bit. It was a good honest snowfall, 8-10 inches maybe, somewhere in there.
Kind of typical for March and the state boys basketball tournament time and everything too, isn't it?
It sure is. I remember I guess it was my junior year when we went to. We weren't playing at the state tournament, but. Our team, River Valley team, went to watch the Thursday games, and we made it back as far as Cross Plains. And back in those days, you drove just in cars, coaches' cars and stuff, and we made it as far as Cross Plains, and that was it. And we couldn't go any further. So we found some house, and they put us up. We're sleeping on the floors and all that. So I guess I'll never forget that. So
times have changed a little bit.
We had no cell phones and stuff, so we were taking turns using the landline to call our parents to let them know we weren't going to be home.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about some things that you've been working on. The PFAS bill. What's the latest on that, Howard?
So PFAS, these are the forever chemicals that are in so many products. They're in nonstick pans. In the firefighters used it a lot for fire suppression. And in the previous budget, we set aside $125 million to help communities deal with the PFAS issue. And the money was set aside in a trust fund. And last week, the Joint Finance Committee, which I co-chair, we approved the bill to advance to the Senate this week to provide the framework for releasing that money. So, and the issue has been, always been, innocent landowner protection, okay? And these are negotiations that were occurring between the legislature and the DNR and the governor's office. And I can give you some examples of innocent landowners. So it is not uncommon for the DNR to give a municipality a permit to spread their municipal sludge on farm fields, okay? And because of the widespread use of PFAS, a lot of the sludge includes PFAS. So now here's a farmer who's now got PFAS on their land, and that farmer didn't have any idea what was in the sludge. So they're an innocent landowner, and the concern there with PFAS is that you're exposing yourself to liability that is basically unlimited, and so which is a big concern. So the legislation that we approved in Joint Finance Committee last week, which will go to the floor to the full Senate this week, provides some innocent landowner protection, so that if you're a farmer and this sludge was spread on your fields and you had no idea what was in the sludge, that the DNR could not sue you for damages for having that PFAS on there. So, and again, we've got a lot of communities around the state that are incurring potentially big costs for this. So I'm glad that we're able to come to a compromise with the governor's office on this and get this, to the floor this week. And that money was set aside for a reason, and we need to get that money out the door to help these communities that have been faced with some of these contamination issues.
Another topic that we wanted to talk about today is solar projects and large-scale wind solar projects. Howard, I know recently you and Travis Tranel were kind of teaming up on looking at that, weren't you?
Yes. So early in the legislative session, Representative Travis Tranel and I authored a bill that would require local elected officials and municipalities to sign off on these large-scale wind and solar projects before they are approved by the Public Service Commission, okay? And because right now, our local municipalities and townships, they have no control whatsoever. And I have heard so much all over my district about why our townships can't have some input. And so the bill that we drafted and had a hearing last week in the Senate Utility Committee would provide that basically a passive review of these projects. So if a municipality or a township didn't approve it within a specified period of time, that the project would go through. So it's a matter of restoring some local control over these projects, which I think just makes sense. And prior to all this change back in 2009, when Jim Doyle was governor, and they basically took away all of the local control and put all of the authority into the Public Service Commission to approve these projects. And I don't think anybody in Southwest Wisconsin ever voted for a Public Service Commission member. They're all appointed by the governor. So basically, the PSC has incredibly strong power over the approval of these projects. So this bill would restore control again at a local level. And then maybe to pivot a little bit, when you look at our data centers in the state, with our data centers, we still have local control for those. And we've had a few communities in the state, in DeForest and a few other communities that said, no, we don't want that project here. And so what the bill that Travis Tranel and I authored would make the wind and solar similar to what the data center projects would be.
That was in the news today a little bit. I was reading about it, the data centers, and there's a bill voted on that would prohibit non-disclosure agreements between data center and developers. And what do you know about that as well, Howard?
Yeah, that's one of the bills. There's a couple of bills out there regarding data centers. One bill has to do with providing that the data centers cannot impose any of their costs on electrical users. Okay, they've got to absorb all the costs of electricity that they consume and any other infrastructure costs. And the non-disclosure agreements, the NDAs, those are unfortunately pretty common now with developers. And they basically say you can go to a landowner or a municipality, and they require you to sign these NDAs, which says you can't talk about this project to anybody. And it puts our local elected officials in a tough spot because they get citizens that are asking about these projects, and if the community has signed a NDA, then they can't talk about it. And so and with these data center projects, if there's no information out there, then the public fills in that vacuum, and sometimes the information is accurate, and sometimes it isn't. So this NDA would prohibit these non-disclosure agreements from applying for these data centers.
Power lines have been a hot topic as well in the news lately. What have you heard?
Yep, and that goes back to the Senate Bill 3. People are. It has to do very similar to the siting of wind and solar, and and all of us want electricity. We need electricity. We want the grid to be solid and all that. But again, a lot of people feel like they just haven't been heard in terms of the siting of the transmission lines and so and I've heard there's been multiple projects, some through my district, a couple through my district, and it's a hot topic, especially if that goes through somebody's farm or along their property lines.
Well, yeah, I mean the power lines and the data centers kind of go hand in hand a little bit, don't they?
They do. Unless the data centers provide their own source of power. Okay, and that's a concept that I think you might be hearing more about down the road. And so instead of having that data center being connected to the power grid, the electric grid, is that they would be providing their own power source. And I think you're going to maybe see some modular nuclear investments, where they would do a modular nuclear. These are small nuclear facilities that would power that data center, so they would not be connected to the grid at all, and that would eliminate the connection between the transmission lines and the data centers.
Name, image, and likeness, that's been in the news as well in regards to UW-Madison Athletic Department. And I think that you saw that in front of the Joint Finance Committee last week, didn't you?
We did. And that passed out of Joint Finance Committee last week. And so, that's an issue that I've heard a fair amount from constituents on that issue too. And, for years, the UW Athletic Department paid the university like $15 million a year or better for years. That was just the standard and stuff. So, which was kind of odd. I think a lot of times people believe that the university was funding the athletic department. Well, it was just the opposite. The money was going from the athletic department back to the university. So anyway, the bill would involve has to do with debt service, the state paying debt service that the UW Athletic Department is incurring right now. So, I don't know if that bill is going to be on the floor of the Senate this week or not, but that did pass out of Joint Finance Committee last week.
There's a lot of debate about that because, they get a lot of scholarships as it is, but I guess that's the going trend in college sports, Howard. If you're going to play, I guess you got to pay, don't you?
I hate it. I mean, I hate the whole NIL thing. It's just there used to be something pure about college athletics. You got your scholarship, to play a sport, basketball, football, tennis, whatever the sport was, and that was basically your compensation. And so, again, there was something pure about that in the past. Now, Indiana University, had an unbelievable football season. I didn't realize the amount of money that the athletic department was bringing in to pay those players on that Indiana University football team. And, and it is, multiple times what the Badgers could pay. So it's and I don't know where this thing ends. My hope is that ultimately that we have a congressional solution, that Congress steps in and puts some caps on this. Otherwise, I don't know how most universities, and I've heard even universities like Ohio State and some of the big ones are running into problems as well. So this isn't just affecting our small colleges. So for a college like the UW-Madison, so many of those Olympic-type sports, the winter sports, and that sort of thing, those are funded by Badger football. Badger football provides 80 to 85% of the revenue for the entire athletic department. So those butts in the seat on Saturdays at Camp Randall basically pay for the whole athletic program. So we need we need to have that football program be successful because they fund rowing and all these other non-revenue generating sports that the university has and is famous for in many respects.
Right now, people are, looking at their taxes, getting those done and that kind of thing. And there were some recent tax cuts, were there not?
There was. So when we did the budget last year, there were a couple of tax cuts that I wanted to, highlight. And the reason I want to bring it up now is because the people that file their tax returns. So we did a couple of things. One was we lowered the tax rate on that second bracket, okay? And that second bracket for married filing jointly used to end at, was $19,000 to $38,000 of income. We raised that $19,000 up to $67,300. And so that amounted to a cut for statewide of $643 million. The other thing that we did in the budget was we exempted retirement income for retirees at age 67. And this is the first $24,000 per person. So, if you've got retirement income of, for a couple of $50,000, that $48,000 is now tax-free. And so I was looking at the February last month's tax data, how much money the state takes in and that sort of thing. But I was looking at the line item for the individual tax refunds in 2026 compared to February of 2025. It is up $167 million over the prior year. So that is significant, and we're just seeing now, I think, the impact of what those tax cuts were that we did last year in the budget. So I haven't done my tax return, so I can't tell you what that looks like. But and also the federal government also made tax cuts at the federal level. So between the federal and state, I think people's refunds this year should be up noticeably over the prior year.
Mm-hmm. That's good news. What are some things you're taking up here this week? I know you're going to be pretty busy as you continue in session, aren't you?
Yeah. So PFAS, obviously, we talked about that already. We're also going to take up the threats to EMTs. And this is a situation that it was brought to my attention and Tony Kurtz's attention by the Sauk County District Attorney. And there is a provision in state law that you can't make threats to healthcare providers, healthcare workers, okay? But there was a gap in the legislation. And so in Sauk County, they had a situation where I think it was an EMT, was threatened in an ambulance by somebody, and the district attorney could not file charges because the threat did not occur in the hospital. It did not occur on premises. And so the bill that Tony Kurtz and I have authored and will be voting on this week in the state assembly says basically it doesn't matter where that threat happens. So if it happens in any place outside the workplace, including like in an ambulance outside the hospital, that the district attorney could charge that person with battery under the new law. So, and what happens? Unfortunately, sometimes our EMS, especially our EMS providers, they deal with their combatant people. They're disoriented. They're upset about being taken to the hospital, and so they can be pretty hard to deal with. So anyway, so that's going to be a good bill. I'm looking forward to voting for that this week.
Yeah, some of those are like that. They're kind of no-brainers, you would think they, but
yeah. And again, what that was brought to our attention by the Sauk County DA, and who recognized the gap in the statutes, and couldn't charge this person for making a threat. So he brought that to our attention, and so Tony Kurtz and I were able to get that legislation right almost to the finish line now. You got to vote on it this week, and then that bill will go off to the governor for his signature.
What are some of the common problems that people contact your office about these days, Howard?
I would say a lot of them have to do with licensing and getting permits and credentialing. And I mean, it's just, and generally people don't call. We aren't the first call they make. They've been dealing with state government, for a long time. And I got a call from one of my local hospitals. They had a surgeon that they hired from another hospital in Wisconsin, and they couldn't get this person credentialed, And, ultimately the hospital called our office late one day, and by 8:30 the next morning, they had their credential. But it's just dealing sometimes with government. And we've also had, I can give you all kinds of stories. And we had a situation, unfortunate situation last year, where one of our neighbors in Dodgeville was murdered. And the person that committed the murder put her body in the back of her car and fled the state. And he was apprehended in Nebraska. And anyway, he was arrested and all that. Well, the daughters, after a while, they reached out to us. They couldn't get a death certificate because Nebraska said, well, the death did not occur in Nebraska, so we can't give you a death certificate. In Wisconsin, too, there was some hold up getting a death certificate. And, of course, they couldn't do anything with the estate if they didn't have a death certificate to go to the bank and all that stuff. So, again, they called our office, and we got involved, and we were able to get the Department of Health Services to, give them a death certificate. So in a lot of these situations, I find it's a matter of talking to a human being who can do something about it. And once you get to the right person, usually the stuff gets fixed relatively quickly. But in the meantime, like in the case of this, these daughters with their mother being murdered, I mean, it's pretty frustrating, and they feel pretty helpless. So anyway, that, again, that's kind of a tragic example, but those things do happen.
So the Senate is in session right now, and then what about the rest of the year? Are you up for election in November, Howard?
Well, the Joint Finance Committee will likely be meeting. We typically meet. We meet as often as needed because we get requests from agencies. They come back, and sometimes money has been set aside for certain projects and stuff, and then they come back with all the details, and Joint Finance Committee meets to approve that. So there'll be a number of Joint Finance Committee meetings here over the next few months, and several months actually. So and the other thing we're working on is closely with the governor's office is we unexpectedly had notified in January we had our tax collections were up $1.5 billion more than what we'd expected when we did the budget last summer. And so we're working with the governor on that. And I can envision something that some money going to our school districts for special education. I can see some property tax relief. I've heard a lot, people, their taxes went up this year. Some property tax relief. And also, I don't think it's a lot of this money, this excess money, not excess money, but this surplus we notified in January is one-time money. So we got to be careful that we don't build that one-time money into ongoing expenditures down the road, because we may not have that money, to rely on in the next budget. So I don't think there's anything wrong with returning some of that back to our taxpayers. I hear a lot from our citizens regarding costs. Everything's gone up. Affordability is a big issue, and so I don't see anything wrong in sending some of that money back to the taxpayers that gave it to us.
Very well. And then you'll be on the campaign trail later this year?
Yes, probably.
Probably? All right.
Yep.
That's a definitive answer.
It sure is. Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you joining us remotely today, Howard. Thanks a lot.
All righty.
You bet.
Stay warm.
Howard Marklein, State Senator representing the 17th Senate District on our morning show. Moving on with the morning show, we've got more community conversation, and joining us is Representative Tony Kurtz. Tony representing the 50th Assembly District, and pleased to have him also remotely today. How are you, Tony?
Good morning, Phil, and good morning to all your listeners. I hope everybody's just kind of staying put and staying safe this beautiful morning.
Well, you always have to look at the positive side, and you being the farmer, this is some money, this snow, for the ground soil, right?
Oh, it's funny you mentioned that, Phil. It is. It's free fertilizer. I mean, we always need the ground moisture and everything, but and this should soak in. I mean, I think later in the week it's going to get a little warmer, so hopefully it's a nice fall, and then soaks right in and gives us that nice little extra fertilizer. I know a lot of old farmers, they'd love to have some oats in the ground by now, because then that's fertilizer. They say, it's the poor man's fertilizer.
Oh yeah, we'd always remember those oats and how green they'd be after a snow like this. So you've been pretty busy lately in some listening sessions. Maybe you could talk about some things that have stood out at some of your recent listening sessions, Tony.
No, we had last week, all day Monday, we had listening sessions in Reedsburg, in Union Center, and then up in the northern half, up in Adams County, we had one in the evening. And then on Friday, we were in Boaz, Cazenovia, and then we ended the late afternoon, early evening there in Richland Center. So it was a lot of good topics. I was very happy that everybody came out and shared their views, their opinions, the good, the bad, the ugly, I like to say. But, a lot of different varieties. I mean, there was no real, EMS, believe it or not, and you understand that with what's going down in Richland County, that was a theme that came out to a lot of different people had concerns about that. Obviously, something that Howard talked about earlier on your show was about the extra surplus and what the state was going to do with that. But no, there was a lot of different ideas and comments, and people were concerned about.
When people go to a listening session, they don't always just come to give kudos. I'm guessing they have some concerns and things like that. What are some hot topics right now? Is it school funding?
School funding was brought up at a couple of them. That was for sure. And, we talked about a lot of that, what's going on with school funding. I do want to piggyback on what Howard just talked about the special education funding. On Wednesday night, the last Wednesday night, I had an opportunity to speak to the school board in Richland School District, and we had a good discussion. But I think that's something, as Howard talked about, the extra surplus we have. I think that's something, we'll continue to negotiate and talk to the governor about what we're going to do. But I think some of that definitely needs to go to help with the special education. That's something that we agreed with on the budget. And I think we need to maybe help a little bit more with that, with special education. As far as the extra surplus, we'll have to see. But the school funding, that was brought up. Like I mentioned, EMS. I had some people bring up about what I will say, too, but before I forget, of all the listening sessions we did a total of 6 of them on this particular time, but I was impressed about how many new people came. And toward the end of the listening session, I would say for those folks that never attended one, what did you think? What was your impression? And so that was a good thing, that there was a lot of new people that came out. And to your point, Phil, it wasn't necessarily negative or positive. People were just curious. What is a listening session? What do you do? And so that was good. And then it was interesting after we had the discussion. Those people that didn't say anything, then they would chime in and say, I am curious about this. And so stewardship was brought up, the Knowles-Nelson. That's something that we passed in the Assembly. I know the Senate has that. And so hopefully they're going to take the time to take that up here in the next couple of days. In Union Center, I had quite a bit of comments about DATCAP, about the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection, some of the concerns about some of the fees that they've increased, but also some of the dairy farmers had some concerns about transitioning from the previous owner, especially if it's in their family, to new owners if it's within the family. Some of the concerns that they had with DATCAP on how they were interpreting some of the regulations. The other one that it didn't surprise me, but it was consistent throughout the area was housing, about the affordability of housing and how we are short on housing. So that was good that people brought that up, but also it makes us more aware that, yeah, we know that's an issue. We did do some funding in the budget last cycle. We kind of looked at that funding mechanism this cycle to make it a little bit easier to get that money out the door. But the thing, like last budget, there was $525 million. 30% of that's supposed to go to rural areas, and that's where I think we need to make sure that money actually gets out the door. But housing was an issue. I mean, that was brought up quite a bit. I was happy to hear about that. I'm actually got my book out, and I'm looking through my notes to see the different things that people brought up. You want to say something, Phil? Because I've been talking a long time.
Oh, I was reading the news this morning, Tony, and one of them was the gas buddy was coming out with all of the gas prices, and I had to feel for our area farmers and producers when they're talking about the price of diesel going up. Here we are going into the spring season and everything like that, and that's not good news for the farming community, is it?
No, it's not, and but once again, the price. Obviously, I think eventually this, the war with Iran, that will stop and they'll settle back down. But to your point, it is not. It's probably the worst time it possibly, because I know I've got a 550-gallon fuel barrel. It's going to have to get filled here pretty soon. And yes, it's not, especially with the cost of fertilizer. I know a lot of area farmers, they'll buy that in the fall. I bought my seed in the fall, but I did not buy my fertilizer in the fall. Now I'm kind of wishing I would. So we'll see. I mean, we get a lot of our fertilizer. It does come from Canada and some other countries, but some of our inputs do come from far away. And so we'll have to definitely look at that. It's not, like you mentioned, it is, with all the other things, with the ag commodity prices, they're horrible. I mean, they really are. Unless you're a cattle guy, but that's going to affect the bottom line as we start filling up and getting our inputs purchased and ready to go. There's something in the news about grants for small communities available, Tony? Yeah, that was a bill that Senator Marklein and I did, and so. A lot of our smaller communities, like you take the town of Richland or the town of Waniwak or even the city of Richland Center, a lot of those smaller communities, they have to apply for grants. It doesn't matter if it's the federal government, the state government. We are relying more on grants. So in other words, like for ARIP, that's the Agricultural Road Improvement Program. That was $150 million in the state budget. Communities apply for those, and they'll write a grant. Well, a lot of our smaller communities, like Richland Center, I mean, they don't have somebody on staff that actually can sit there and actually write the grant. Particularly our smaller townships or our smaller villages. I mean, that's the clerk or the treasurer or maybe one of the town chairmen are actually writing that grant. And they don't have necessarily the expertise to do that, and so. One thing, what we did was we provided a grant program, and I know it sounds kind of counterproductive, but you got to get a grant to get a grant. But the state will provide any community below 7,500 people. So like a Richland Center could apply for that. Viola could apply, Casanova could apply, and basically it's going to be a very simple one-page form where you as a community can get up to a $5,000 to go out and hire somebody to actually write that grant for you. And so like a Reedsburg is well over 10,000 people. They actually have somebody on staff that helps with that, whereas our smaller communities don't. And so that was something that we got money in the budget. The Senate passed it several months ago. We passed it last month in the state assembly, and that's something that I'm very confident the governor's going to sign. But that's going to help a lot of our smaller communities. And it's interesting you brought that up, because when we were in Casanova on Friday, there was somebody from one of our smaller communities, Ironton, and they were talking about the need to get to help with their some of the infrastructure projects and grant programs, and this is something they were really interested for, because they work with different people that can help them with the grant, but it's paying for that grant writing expertise now that will give them the ability to do that.
Some of the small communities could use that these days, couldn't they?
Well, absolutely. I mean, and like I said, I know some people don't like the fact that over the last several decades, you've been seeing more and more grants. I mean, we do that with a lot of road funding, et cetera, like I just talked about the ARIP. But there is a reason why it doesn't matter if it's the federal government or the state government, they tend to do more grants because I guess it goes back to when we had the horrible recession in 2008, 2009. It's easier if we have another horrible recession. It's easier to stop the grant funding. In other words, if we have to balance a budget, which in the state of Wisconsin we have to balance our state budget, those are type of things that are much easier to say. Okay, this budget cycle we can't do XYZ grant funding because we just don't have the money. Whereas if we have a line item that's actually, every budget cycle, it's a dedicated amount of money that we provide for a program, that is obviously a little harder to pull back when we already have what we call a line item in the state budget, whereas the grant funding is much easier to pull back. And so it's both administrations, both Republicans, Democrats over the years have just gone more to grant funding, and that's one of the reasons why it does help if we do have a bad recession again. And I think everybody understands we did have a bad recession, and it's not I don't foresee one right now coming, but once again, we've had them in the past, and unfortunately cycles, and we're going to probably have one again sometime in the future.
Representative Tony Kurtz, our guest on today's morning show. Howard talked about threats to EMTs, which I had not even thought about that, but you and he were also working on a bill to try to prevent that, weren't you?
Well, what happened is there was a last cycle, there was a study committee on basically the codification of different felonies and misdemeanors, and it was just to kind of review what those statutes were. Well, unfortunately, when they redid the statutes, they actually took out, and it was nobody's fault. It was basically an error. And they took out the fact that if an EMT or an EMR or a paramedic actually goes out to a scene, we're having a problem with more and more of those fine individuals actually getting threatened or actually have been assaulted. And before, and the Sauk County DA, actually Michael Albright, brought this to our attention back in the summer and said, hey, this isn't in the statute anymore. Before, I could charge somebody and they had an incident up in Baraboo at the Ho-Chunk Casino where somebody threatened an EMT that showed up to provide treatment. The DA was not allowed to charge him under that because it was no longer in the statute. So Howard and I, we acted very quickly. I know, unfortunately, sometimes government runs like a snail pace. On this case, we got with our colleagues that actually were in charge of the study committee last session. We talked to them. We talked to Ledge Counsel. Ledge Counsel does basically a bunch of our lawyers. And they all looked at it and said, oh, my goodness, this completely got taken out by accident. So fortunately, we got that back. It passed the Assembly. It's going to pass the Senate. It sounds like this week. And so, once again, that's something that the governor will sign into law. And it's interesting. My staff, along with Howard's staff, will sit on the EMS board. There's an EMS board that meets every quarter, and this was something that was actually brought up 4 months ago at the EMS, the statewide EMS board, about the threats to EMS providers, paramedics, EMTs. And so that's growing, unfortunately. And so now, once again, we get that statute back on the books. And so people that are threatening those providers can actually be held accountable. There's no sense in that. We last cycle, and maybe it was 2 cycles ago, we did the same thing for nurses and hospital employees too, because people go to ER or urgent care. There's no reason for them to threaten our healthcare providers, and now our EMS providers as well.
State Assembly has adjourned for the year. Any thought that might change, where maybe it would be longer, meetings, or meeting again, or how do you look at it?
Oh no, I think we could definitely. The governor talked about coming in for a extraordinary session to do what they call a nonpartisan redistricting. That's something that just to let people understand. Iowa does a nonpartisan redistricting. We actually last cycle in the assembly, we actually voted for that. So it's something that I'm on record for voting for. I think we have floor periods in March, but we also have floor periods in April. What Howard was talking about earlier about what we can do or possibly ideas with the extra surplus, is that property tax relief, which I think we definitely need to do, or is it, something for special education. Those are all the type of things that we would have to come in for, and I know we are willing and to come in and to have those discussions. Right now, there's still ongoing discussions with the governor and the speaker and the Senate Majority Leader on the path forward with the surplus. That will continue, and once again, we can come in and act accordingly to make sure we can pass legislation to get those things done.
Everybody has ideas on how that surplus should be spent, don't they?
They do. They do. I mean, it's. I think special ed is something we all agree on, and then now it's what mechanism do you do to help with property taxes? I know some of my colleagues, they want to do a rebate check. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. If you're going to do that, it needs to be a substantial amount. I know a couple of years ago there was like $100 rebate check. I don't think that's. I think we did something like that. I think the majority of our constituents to say just go ahead and keep it, invest in things. And so, but I mean, if you can make it substantial, you make it like $500 a person. I think that people are, and then that person could take that and put it toward their property taxes or other bills that they may have. And so we'll see. Like I said, that's all in the negotiations right now. But I do think, listening, we have talked about the listening sessions. Obviously, property taxes is a big concern. And I think we want to do something with it. But I do want to piggyback on what Howard said. We just have to be careful. A lot of this is one-time money. And we don't want to bake that into our state budget, and in case we do have a somewhat of a slowdown.
All right, and the next challenge for you is moving snow, I would guess.
Oh yeah, no, I mean you and I were talking before we went on air, and I know looking at the totals. I know yesterday, I think you guys only had 2 or 3 inches, where I had about 8 inches, and then of course all the snow last night. We've got a lot more, and I think you said 7. It's just hard to tell with the drifting and everything. So, but just be careful. I mean, stay off the road. Let our wonderful plow crews do their job, and I mean, if you don't have to go anywhere, I know a lot of people obviously working, and I appreciate all that. But just, I mean, if you can stay put, try ahead and stay put, and let the crews do their thing.
You bet. Well said. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in person next month. Hopefully there's not an April snowstorm, but I guess we never know, do we?
We never know. But thank you, Phil. Once again, everybody just be safe. And, before you know it, it'll be 50 degrees and sun's out. So
can't wait. Representative Tony Kurtz joining us on this portion of the morning show.